Welcome back to the channel, guys. In today's video, I've got an exciting one because whether we like this or not, I think we can pretty much say at this point that the electric STI has been confirmed. This is one of those videos that I'm not sure how I feel about making because I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it, but this is probably the most definitive news. This is not hearsay. We have quotes from Subaru executives, and we basically know at this point that if and when, and this is going to be really when, we see the next STI, it's going to be electric. And this is exciting stuff because we're seeing evidence that Subaru thinks we really need the STI. Now, I'm not going to go into whether it's, well, I might go into whether or not it's good that we see electric, but start by what we know from Subaru. And if you follow the channel, one, you should if you don't, but two, if you do follow the channel, you'll notice that we are taking a slight break from our 2016 Subaru WRX rebuild. I'm just waiting for parts. There will be an episode coming out next week or sometime midweek when I have the parts. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm rebuilding a 2016 Subaru WRX from blown engine to track beast. Every single step, engine coming out, engine teardown, everything. So keep an eye out for that on the channel. So what do we know? We know that a Subaru executive, specifically the Subaru executive that is responsible for reporting and talking about the entirety of Europe, has made a statement. Were they supposed to? Were they not supposed to? At this point is a little unclear, but they did make a statement, and they said a few things. The first thing is we finally heard why exactly the STI didn't come out, and that's because this Subaru executive said that the STI was absent from the previous generation launch because of restrictive emission norms in Europe, specifically all of the kind of EU sales platform. Essentially, the EU, because of emissions requirements, requires a gasoline particulate filter that quite literally chokes the engine and is one of the reasons why we don't see, let's say, the Nissan Z, or we see organizations that are still selling but having huge penalties and taxes. I think the classic example is that if you wanted to buy a Civic Type R in France, I think it cost about $120,000, $130,000 to buy. And that's why we didn't see the STI. The Subaru market in Europe is so important to their global platform that was one of the massive prohibitive factors. Now, there were some emissions prohibitive factors in the US and some of the other markets, but because they could basically not sell this car on an entire global platform and the STI represents such a small portion of their sales, it made a big business factor. Now, I'm really not saying that that's absolutely everything, but that's quite literally from a Subaru exec why we really saw an absent STI in the running. Now, one step further to confirm that we're going to get an STI, I can quote, and I'm gonna paraphrase the first part. The first part is basically he said in his statement that when you think about Subaru, you think about STI. You think about the STI brand, you think about the STI models, and that's what gives the heart and what Subaru is to Subaru. And now I can legitimately quote him. He said, we need to bring, I'll make sure I say this right, we need to bring sportiness back to Subaru. And that's coming out of the statement of, the brand identity of Subaru is really known as the STI. So we've basically got confirmation that the top executives at Subaru think the STI needs to come back. It's really, really important to them. And they think it's part of the brand identity, and that is missing in what currently exists in the Subaru stratosphere. So just that alone is extremely exciting, right? Because one, to the best that we could ever get, right? This is something that we've never really gotten in the past. Very rarely does a Subaru spokesperson or, top executive make statements regarding this kind of stuff. So what that really tells us, because again, even with previous generations, we haven't got something this concrete. We can basically make the assumption that one, the STI is going to come back. That's as clear as can be. I would even go as far as saying is if you work in the press department for Subaru, this executive was too clear in what they were saying, because honestly, there's too much basically confirmation in what they're trying to say. So that's pretty exciting. Now, we're gonna go one step further and we're gonna talk about why we know it's coming as electric. So it's gonna be a combination of what this basically press release from this executive was, because it was a combination of talking about, yes, we missed the STI. It was also talking about electrification and basically, a combination of both that single person, but also a couple other large Subaru outlets talking about electrification in terms of meeting emission standards with other vehicles, talking more of their mainstream models. So we can see that kind of trends coming across. On top of that, we've now seen basic confirmation that if Subaru wants to sell in the European market, which is a large portion of their sales, and now the Japanese market, which is such a large portion of their home base because it is literally their home base. And in America, we might think that, oh, we represent the buying power of these car brands. And kind of it's true, but it's also not. These brands cater to their home base first. So if you have the home country of the brand and you have an entire continent that represents a large portion of first world buying power, it is a little scary. Now, to go one step further to provide context to you guys that don't really understand how other brands can release sports cars where Subaru might struggle, specifically in the US market. In the US market, brands have to meet what's called fleet standards, which means every car that they sell adds up into one, and that fleet of cars must equal a certain minimum requirement. Now, unfortunately, because Subaru sells primarily, all of them, are all-wheel drives, essentially. BRZ, sorry. All-wheel drives make significantly less gas mileage. They are in the ballpark of an additional 20% loss, up to 25% loss of energy from engine to wheels when they produce power, which means they need to produce 20 to 25% more power to have the same results as, let's say, a rear-wheel drive car. What does that really mean? It means it impacts the gas mileage for the fleet pretty substantially when almost all of your cars are all-wheel drive. They just make less gas mileage, which means they have less gas mileage. Even though the STI is less of a seller, they have less gas mileage to kind of play with, especially because the delivered WRX also makes pretty damn low gas mileage. So if you were to make the F824 any more fun, you're probably cutting significant, MPG off that range. So it's really something to think about. So a combination of those things and a few basically at a dealer level statements, we basically know it's coming. We now know that the STI is coming, and that's been the big question mark. One of the reasons why no one's been able to really confirm that it's going to be electric, because a lot of people have just basically said the STI is going to be kind of done with and we're going to get some hybrid, something in the middle essentially. But now that we know that the STI is coming, now that we know that the, some of the top execs in Subaru that represent a huge portion of the buying market think that the STI needs to deliver sportiness and performance, and have kind of reconfirmed this bias that we think has essentially been gone because we've been worried that Subaru doesn't care about that anymore. Now that that's confirmed, we can then essentially confirm that it's becoming electric or some type of electrification, maybe hybrid, but it makes the most sense at this point to produce something electric. So what does that mean in terms of, and again, guys, a lot of you guys are gonna say, maybe this is hearsay. This is as confirmed as it gets, right? When you have an executive speaking, that's as best as we can get, right? We cannot ask anymore until they're physically announcing the car. Now, because of all this information and the changing timelines in these emission standards, and we got a big new year coming up, 2026 is gonna be another year where they do a revision both in the United States and in Europe and in Australia, and typically Japan follows that just because the big powers are making these emission changes. We're probably not going to see anything until the 2027 or 2028 model year, which also tracks with the normal generation update from Subaru for the rest of their platform. So what we'll probably see is when the next generation WRX comes out, we're going to see the STI counterpart. Now, typically that's anywhere from 7, 8, 9 years. I would guess we're probably looking at a 7 or 8 year cycle on this. Again, just because they're going to have to make substantial changes on the next one. So we're probably looking at a 2028 release, or a 2028 kind of release to us and 2029 deliveries, which is a long time out, but it's the most concrete thing that we've had so far. And my guess is that in the next year or so, we're going to start seeing concept models, which are going to further confirm what we know right now. And yeah, thank you guys for watching the video. I usually am going off much less because that's what the whole pundit and news industry has, but we've got a lot more, so it's fantastic and it's a lot of fun. So exciting stuff to come to the brand. But yeah, I will see you guys in the next video, and if you haven't subscribed and follow along on the build, please consider checking out some of those build videos. You'll learn something at the very least. They're a lot of fun. Even if you just like are watching and doing something else, you will learn something about these cars. No matter what WRX you drive or STI you drive, these cars at some level are very, very similar, and I take apart literally everything. So it's a cool watch. I'll see you guys in the next video.